Hello, this is Jon Croft, and this is Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft. And I'm Jon Croft. And who are you, and how are you? Hi, Rebecca. How are you?
I'm good. I liked that music you had playing there. That was really cool.
White Bat Audio, as usual. Yeah, Carl Casey is amazing. He's a dude from Vancouver. And if you buy some of his music, people can use it as long as they follow his rules. So, but he's got good music. I love it.
Yeah.
And here we are. We're back for you on Friday night, 8 o'clock. This is about almost 8:30. It's 8:25, starting at about 8:25. And now it's 8:28, and we're doing not so bad. We're not doing too bad.
Yeah.
I was playing with a variety of topics for tonight, but James Lindsay does it again. James Lindsay, he's a guy on Twitter, but he's not just a guy on Twitter. No, he's highly decorated culture warrior. He's probably the foremost expert on communism today, and Wokism, and how they interact with each other. So I'll be reading one of his tweets, which is quite long. It's a thread. I won't read the whole thing, but just the parts that I consider important because it's about civilization, right? And when it's about civilization, to me, it's about culture. That's to me what culture is. Obviously, civilization is a little more complicated than just culture. But what civilization is a more stratified, more diverse, more interesting society than just something like a city-state or something like a tribe that hunts and gathers, right? It's a little more diverse and interesting than that. It's a little more complicated. But let me get into his tweet. But I think I left my drink somewhere. Oh, here it is.
Oh, no.
It's okay. I got myself some nice decaf herbal tea here. I've got to enjoy my teas now because I'm on keto, so I don't get all the stuff I used to get. But I'm enjoying it quite a bit. How are you enjoying keto, honey?
Yeah, I think it's good. I think it's been a good thing.
It feels great, and the kids are not too bad with it. They're, sometimes they complain, but they were complaining before keto anyway.
They might have been complaining more before keto.
I think you're right.
Just a little bit more.
Yeah, they actually complain less. That's so interesting, isn't it?
Yes.
I think it's because I primed the pump. Like, I was getting them ready. I was like, we are going to be on keto. It's going to be hard.
Yeah.
I was warning them. I was like, it's going to be hard. You're not going to like it. Your body's going to be screaming for sugar.
Yeah.
All this stuff. And they're like, ooh, whatever. Actually, they were listening pretty well. They were like, okay. This is serious. It's important.
Yeah.
When Daddy's saying something serious, oftentimes they actually do listen. So
Yep.
I'm at least happy to have that. So that's great.
Yes.
But so yeah, let's talk about this discussion on civilization versus catharsis. Now, in a moment, you'll see why catharsis, right? Because James Lindsay uses this term to discuss something interesting. So I'll read some of this tweet, okay? So he starts out, we in the West currently stand before the turning of the great tide of history. So already you're like, whoa, what? This sounds very grandiose. Wow. Well, it actually is, but some of the things he says many people are not going to jive with because they don't understand the connection between what's happening in our culture and communism. So while it's true that we try to focus on culture and art and entertainment and some of the nuts and bolts of that, some of the philosophy of that, I mean, civilizational stuff in our survival is pretty important. And actually, you'd be surprised how important it is to combat things like fascism or communism or these extreme forces that seek to censor freedom, get rid of freedom, the freedom to express yourself through art. And true culture is against propaganda. So propaganda is, as we've talked about, it's somebody paying you to give a message. And then once that message is given, you're supposed to believe it. And if you don't believe it, there's something wrong with you. So, and then generally that's tied to a government or the power of a group of elites to gain power. So, to gain even more power over society. And so this is not authentic in its nature. It's not an opportunity for you to sit down and go, oh, I don't know about that. Let's have an honest, open discussion about that. No, propaganda is not for that purpose. Propaganda is for the purpose of you going, oh, yes, I agree, yes. And when you don't do that, right, then people take note of that. They go, is he with us or against us, right? Yeah. So this is the nature of a lot of this kind of shady stuff that's happened in governments for the past century. Propaganda is a force that has caused immense suffering in the world. World War I, World War II, many of these other wars, especially wars tied to extreme ideology, like communism, they've used propaganda to great effect to enslave the minds of their people. So if your mind is already enslaved, then you don't mind being enslaved physically. That's the key here. And this is why the media and culture is so important. And this is why a cultural revolution occurs before communism actually takes over, is because what they want to do is enslave your mind first. And if you'll accept their cult-like behavior, then they can actually bring the cult. So, and force people to do things. So, anyway, let's continue on here. He's going into this grandiose statement about communism and about our culture and civilization. So, we in the West currently stand before the turning of the great tide of history, he says. Communists have been or are nearly exposed, and we now or will soon face a fateful, perhaps desperate choice of which way to go next. We have two choices here, either catharsis or civilization. So you're probably thinking, what? What are you talking about? Catharsis is an emotional release, he says. In fact, a ritual purification of the self through emotional release that arises after an overwhelming experience. An attempted communist revolution that nearly succeeds and the destruction of our nation is such an overwhelming experience. Right? So, as you guys know, I've talked about culture and the healing quality of culture and how when a society goes off to war and the men come back from war and they're dealing with trauma, culture helps them heal, right? It helps them nurture their mind and their thinking, and they can integrate better back into society. Well, this is another kind of emotional release, isn't it? It's like a catharsis, but it's pointed in a different direction, right? So we'll get back into his tweet. So his tweet. He goes into a list of things that have occurred. We've seen the rule of law destroyed through the West and turned into a two-tiered rule-by-law system in which communists favor token groups, useful assets, and idiots. Organizers and activists are effectively legally immune for their criminality. In the name of what they once called liberating tolerance, we've been required to tolerate the intolerable. To the reinvigoration of racism and the hate in our society, rampant criminality, child abuse, invasion of illegal aliens flooding unvetted into the country. We've watched our cities burn with few consequences. We've watched our democratic, quote, democratic politicians cheered on and tell us change is meant to be uncomfortable. We've been censored, silenced, mandated, threatened, badgered, bullied, and we've tolerated it for our kids and countries. We've seen a noble president slandered, indicted, raided, threatened, fined, humiliated, and even witnessed an attempt on his life that nearly succeeded on live television. We've watched them lie, deflect, and sweep it under the rug as easy as breathing. We've fought to protect our kids from learning loss, closed schools, psychological, emotional, social abuse, posing as learning, radicalization. Despite our best efforts, we've suffered our families being torn apart over manipulative lies and rampant hatecraft. We could go on and on about our injuries. We have our own difficult road to walk to learn to trust our countrymen, our neighbors, our government, our institutions, our own family members again, even. If we ever can. There's much to be angry about. In other words, we are primed for catharsis. We want it. We deserve it. We need it. We are primed for sweet emotional release that lets out all of the injury of tolerance that has been forced upon us over the last several years as the communists tried to steal our own lives. So, I could come back to the point. We in the West stand at the turning point of the tide, or just before it, and we have a choice. Do we take catharsis, or do we choose civilization? It isn't an easy choice to make. Catharsis not only feels necessary, it feels good. Imagine how it would feel to see all these bastards punished for their crimes and their sins, not just held accountable, but punished. That the disgust they have thrown upon us would be thrust back on them until they change their pitiful minds and realize what they did. Imagine not just seeing it, but participating in it, letting all the pent-up emotion of a decade of abuse flow out into the deserving parties and many suitably fitting scapegoats as we ride that riptide far, far, far out to sea and settle all of our scores and set things right. Paints an interesting picture, doesn't it? Catharsis is, he says, in fact, emotionally purifying, but it also feels good. It's release. We're long overdue for that. Isn't it what we want? Isn't it what we deserve? Isn't it the only way? The price we would pay for it is just civilization itself. But isn't that worth it? He's really going to make you think here. Look inside yourself, because we have a choice to make, and it's a choice that cuts through every human heart. Borrowing the language of Solzhenitsyn here. Do we choose sweet catharsis, he says, or do we choose civilization for ourselves, our children, and our grandchildren? We can only choose one, because if we choose catharsis, sweet, sweet catharsis, we sacrifice civilization on the altar of our hurt feelings. And like I said, ride that riptide far, far, far out to sea. The rush will be amazing, but the hangover awaits. I pray this with you, he says, on his last tweet of the thread. He said, and by the way, James Lindsay is not a Christian. He's a confessing atheist, but he has said the most Christian things in the last year and chided and almost derided Christians. Why don't you grab onto your faith again? I'm reading the Bible right here and it says you should be doing this and you're not doing it. He's chiding us. This atheist guy who knows more than we do is like, why aren't you following your faith? So we need this reminder, guys. We need this reminder. He's going to give us this last tweet here. Okay, here it is. He says, I pray this with you. He's going to pray for us and with us as an atheist. He says, Romans 12, let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor that which is evil. Cleave to that which is good. In love of the brethren be tenderly affectioned one to another. In honor preferring one another. In diligence not slothful, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, continuing steadfastly in prayer, communicating to the necessities of the saints, given to hospitality. Bless them that persecute you. Bless and curse not. Rejoice with them that rejoice. Weep with them that weep. Be of the same mind one toward another. Set not your mind on high things, but condescend to things that are lowly. Be not wise in your own conceits. Render to no man evil for evil. Take thought for things honorable in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as in you lieth, be at peace with all men. Avenge not yourselves, beloved, but give place unto the wrath of God. For it is written, Vengeance belongeth unto me, I will recompense, says the Lord. But if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him to drink. For in doing so thou shalt heap coals of fire upon his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Woo!
Woo.
Now, fellow Christian, is James Lindsay not correct here? Is James Lindsay incorrect about our faith? No, he's absolutely correct. And even if he's an atheist, we should listen to him because he's spouting truth here. Okay? The church is not against facts. The church is not against reason or logic. And the church is definitely not against our own scriptures. So let's listen to people like this who have truths to say, not to people who corrupt our religion. James is not trying to corrupt our religion. He's actually asking us, hey, don't you believe this? He's not even saying he believes it. He's just saying, don't you believe this? And so if we believe this, why are we seeking some kind of vengeful catharsis for ourselves? You know, the truth is, and I've seen this, I don't mean to get too political here, and I'm going to try not to. So, honey, if I get a little too political, you think I'll just be like, oh, let's talk about rabbits or something. I don't know.
Okay.
But like, guys, I've heard people talk about, oh, the things we're going to do once Trump gets in. It's going to be a barn burner. It's going to be crazy. These are the things we're going to do, right? We have to be careful, guys. The truth is, I live in Florida, and DeSantis has been doing a lot of great things. People call him bad names too, just like they call Trump bad names. But DeSantis has been using the Constitution here to make laws that are lawful and good and defend families and defend regular people. And he's been preventing crime. He's been preventing these things happening in other states that are still happening to this day. I mean, the Liberty Bell getting defaced. What is wrong with you people in Philadelphia? Are you guys weaklings? What is going up with that? Like, why are you allowing these people to deface the Liberty Bell? It's stupid, okay? Like, follow the law. The law is this is not allowed. And so put these people in prison. And the fact that they're not going to do that probably, it's on them. It's not even on the people who are defacing these things at that point. It's on these police officers. That's their fault. And so we have to remember that doing justice, doing things that are lawful, is how we need to solve this problem. When you have plenty of evidence that people are doing things the wrong way, being illegal, including crossing the border, etc., these things are clearly illegal for a reason, right? So we can use, I mean, that's what a law and order candidate is, right? So I understand Trump coming into power, but I'll be frank with you, Trump's not a law and order candidate. So he concerns me. I'm afraid that, people like him might not have a full grasp of what is right and wrong here. And the truth is, I'm already seeing signs of that. Trump just did a tweet saying that burning our U.S. flag should be illegal. And We've discussed this already numerous times in our country. And even people like me who are conservative have said, you know what? It's cool. It's free speech. As long as you're not causing a hazard, right? The fire is not going out of whack. It's as long as it's your flag, you're not taking someone else's flag, right? This is what free speech is, right? This is what freedom of speech means. You know, it also protects our right to burn their flag, whatever their flag happens to be. So we should be able to do that. Imagine if we made it illegal, then we tried to burn their flag, and then next time there's a president, well, they're like, well, we're going to make this illegal too. It never ends. If you just keep making these things illegal, it never ends. But you know what is illegal? Defacing the Liberty Bell. That's illegal. And are we doing something about that? No. So making another law that infringes on our rights, like burning the flag illegal, is just going to cause it to be used against us, because they're the ones who are enforcing the laws and we're not. So, you know, that's a problem, guys. We have to, as James indicates, we have to embrace civilization. So, what are some of the civilizations he might be invoking here? You know, in your memory. Like, we teach our kids this stuff, right, honey? Mm-hmm. Civilizations throughout history. Are they soft on crime? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, some of the greatest civilizations, sure, many of them are empires, you know, and some can be very brutal, but they're definitely not soft on crime. They don't allow this stuff. But catharsis, that's a momentary backlash, right? That's a momentary bit of anger that you have. And you're going to get it out, right? And then you're going to afterwards go, maybe I went too far, right? Maybe I did exactly what they did. Maybe I'm no better than they are, right? So we have to remember also bringing it down, bringing it back to culture, right? Culture is basically how we're going to be living together in a society. What's excellent? What's beautiful? Right? What's purposeful? What do our myths tell us about this? And so we talked about the Bible and what the Bible says. So, you know, what about our storytelling? What about our what about the beauty we want to talk about? It doesn't even have to be about this subject of crime or whatever it is, or bad political ideology, right? All it has to be is a story that offends somebody, right? That's all it has to be. Just a story that offended some group of people. And if you've got catharsis going on instead of civilization, how are you going to deal with that offensive material? So people are going to take catharsis out on you, aren't they? They're not going to stop with you. You know, they're going to look for all kinds of offensive things that offends their sensibility. But James talks about the difference between this catharsis, right? This kind of retributive attitude, this vengefulness. It's about your feelings, right? Momentary feelings. And civilization. So he's making a contrast here. It's not that civilizations weren't brutal. They often were, right? But it's done in an orderly fashion. And so you even have things like representation. You have things like voting. You have things like rights, right? So I think of mostly the Greeks and the Romans. That's mostly what I think. Maybe it's because I'm a Westerner. I don't know. But I like that era. I understand some of it. And to me, what it does, like what Rome did was, a lot of people, they like to look at Rome as like they're perfect, or they look at Rome like they're totally barbaric, they're evil and terrible. And the truth is, neither one of those things is accurate. Sure, Rome was brutal against the Jews during their occupation there, and we have ample evidence of that in the Bible. So more specifically, they taxed the Jews harshly. And if the Jews wanted to do something of their own accord that the Romans didn't like, the Romans could clamp down on that and say, I don't care if that's your tradition, you're not allowed to do this. So you're causing an unsafe situation here. We're gonna clamp down on this. And they wanted people also to bow down to Roman gods. If they did that, then especially to Caesar, and if they did that, then they felt like they were more integrated, like they could trust them more. And Jews did not want to do that. So Rome didn't like that. So they're going to be a little more brutal with the Jews, right? So these are truths we see, and you can see ample evidence of this in other historians like Josephus, etc. But it's not about that so much as it is understanding history in the sense of where did we come from and where are we going historically. What Rome provided was a stratified society that didn't exist before that. It was far more stratified. You could say it was the first multicultural society. Or more accurately, they were pluralistic. So pluralistic just means that there's one dominant culture, but it's tolerant of the subcultures underneath it. But it certainly establishes its dominance when it has to. So you could say that's more of what Rome really was. They were establishing their dominance, but they were also tolerating other cultures below them, the conquered peoples, right? They would tolerate many of them. They weren't just eliminating them, right? And so civilizations like this, you could say, are great civilizations because you can survive and thrive and even become rich and prosperous in this kind of society, where previously it was just you and your tribe and you and your little group, and you were limited on trade, you were limited on the styles of culture you were allowed to play with. A homogenized society tends to be very self-centered. So it's about us, it's about our little folk art, it's not about all these other weird people out there. And so when an artist, and of course I'm an artist, right? So I think about a lot of these things as an artist, as a thinker, as a person who understands myths and stories. And so you think about, if you're just going to be in this homogenized culture, you're really only allowed to play in that little pond, culturally speaking, socially speaking, right? But if you're in a larger stratified society like Rome, like a civilization, right, you're allowed to play in many of those other subcultures. And you end up even morphing cultures together. And actually, this is good because Rome wants that. Rome, in a sense, wants to create a multicultural society. But the strong authoritarians, the law and order people, are going to try to keep it, with their own dominant culture, right? They want to keep control. So that is still important to Rome. But eventually, right, what tends to happen, and this is also what happened with Rome, is that as they became more and more multicultural, Rome began to divide and separate. And that's very clear with the Great Schism, right? And we're talking about two groups of Christians who, in a sense, had their own cultures, right? And how do we know this? They had their own religions. Well, I'm sorry, they had their own languages, right? And they had, in some cases, their own ways of worshiping. that are a little different from each other. And so when there was disputes, it became easier for them to say, let's just schism, right? This will make it easier. We don't have to be under your bishops. You don't have to be under our bishops, right? And this is often how it works with cultures. So if you become multicultural, you're going to see, and this is what's happened in our country, in the West. We've become so multicultural, right, that when things start breaking down, when we start to have disagreements, then if things are in place, maybe we have our own languages, maybe we have our own cultural aesthetic, whatever it is, right? Our own belief systems, our own religions. It's going to become far easier for us to separate and schism. So this is what you're seeing now. And the question then is, well, how do we schism? Thankfully, at this time with the Roman Empire, they knew to peacefully schism, right? But is that going to happen in the United States? Is it going to be peaceful? Is there going to be schism at all? Are we even smart enough to schism instead of fighting? Because when you study the Civil War, you can see that it wasn't, the North was not accepting Southern succession. They were not going to accept their succession because the South brought too many taxes into the North. They would lose a whole bunch of money by the South seceding. So the South wanted the money from slavery and the North wanted the money from taxation. It's pretty much about money, wasn't it? Right? So this is a shame, isn't it? It's a shame when your country has to experience this cathartic release in order to return to normal, right? Some cathartic release like a civil war or something in order to return to normal. No, instead, I think we need to turn back to a civilized way of thinking. If somebody wrongs you, you take them to court. That's civilized. If somebody's doing something violent or destructive, you arrest them and you put them in jail. And then you try them. And if they succeed, then you let them go. You have a process for this, right? We've always had a process for this in civilization. They knew how to do this in Rome, in the Roman time. Have we forgotten this? No, absolutely not. We just refuse to do it. We don't see the value in order and civilization. Why? Because James tells us. He said that these guys are actually communists. It makes it very clear that communists are not in favor of civilization the way we are, right? What they believe in is a never-ending revolution. They don't believe in civilization the way we do. So revolution is a lot of death and murder and killing for the sake of their ideology, right? Is that really the kind of civilization we should be embracing? And do you think really that our arts and our culture and our language and all these things will thrive under a totalitarian system? So, if you don't believe that, then why are you voting for people who believe in this? And why are you supporting these guys who believe in this? You can't do that. So, believe me, I'm not here to tell you how to vote. I'm telling you to study and research this stuff because it's pretty important. And I think he's right that there are many people on the right now who would like to have some catharsis and some payback for stuff that's happened in history. And me and James and people like us are trying to plead with you and say, do not give in to this hatred. Right? Do not do that. That's not an embrace of civilization. It's not an embrace of all the laws we've built up. No taxation without representation. So many things in our history and our culture that have made us a great society. And it's through rationality and the truth and justice that we gain an end to these kinds of things, a cessation to this kind of nonsense happening in our culture right now. You know, the truth is, a lot of people right now are in office who shouldn't be there. They should be in jail. That's just the truth. And so when we actually expose these truths, and if we actually want justice to occur, we're going to be supporting an honest assessment of the facts in court so that justice can happen. That's what I believe in. That's what we should be believing in if we want civilization to survive. And it's, in many ways, it's very simple. It's just as simple as that. Either justice is blind and we want justice, or we believe in vengeance and tribal warfare back and forth, which is the very system that the Native Americans here could not survive with. They had this system of retribution between tribes. It made them weak, and they couldn't survive us. They couldn't survive us. So let's not embrace that, guys. I wanted to also give you my response to this. One of the things I said about this to James's tweet. I said, I wanted to point us to God because I'm so glad that he mentioned Romans and the Bible in his tweet. So I said, the Bible has pointed the way to civilization over and over. It is better for one innocent man to go free than 10 evil ones to be incarcerated. That justice is blind, that it must be completed through an equally applied standard of fairness. Just the fact that you cannot have justice without truth. All of these are biblical standards. All of them. In the Bible. It's where we get it. It's where we get our concept of justice is from the Bible. Today, but today we don't even know what a woman is. So civilization will be very fleeting for us unless we can once again stand humbly before God and allow God to speak to us. So that's reading the Bible again. That's being in prayer again, like James indicates. We need to be doing some of that stuff again. And if we don't, then our passions will overtake us, and we might not be able to survive all these things. So I just want to support rationality, right? And returning to civilization, because I want to be making culture happen and helping our society to thrive with great art. And I can't do that if people reach out for catharsis and try to harm people. That's not going to work, guys. It's not going to help anybody. So I really value what he's saying, and I think we need to study the great civilizations like Rome to learn how to get back on track. And study the Bible, study Rome, study the Greeks, study the Persians, the Egyptians maybe, the Jews, study the Bible. And, we cannot allow our passions to rule us. Let me just go to Genesis here. I think it's Genesis 4. This is a very important story, guys. When you're talking about chaos, you're talking about law and order, you're talking about rule, you're talking about human passion, right? Because why? Because Genesis 4 is the first murder that takes place on earth. Cain and Abel. So you go to Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel brought a sacrifice before the Lord, right? Abel brought a gift, the best portions. We're talking chapter 4, verse 4, Abel brought a gift. Oh wait, I missed the chapter, verse 3. Abel became a shepherd while Cain cultivated the ground. When it was time for the harvest, Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. 4. Abel also brought a gift, the best portions of the firstborn lambs from his flocks. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift. So he had a preference, right? He preferred Abel's gift. But he did not accept Cain and his gift. This made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. So, guys, God is a person. He has preferences. He likes certain things and doesn't like certain things. But it's not like he didn't want to be Cain's friend, right? That's not what it's saying here. Just because he didn't like Cain's gift doesn't mean he didn't want Cain to have a relationship with him. And he wasn't imposing on Cain a standard that Cain couldn't meet. Cain could meet God's standard. Okay? God doesn't ever do that to us, friends. He doesn't impose a standard on us that we cannot meet. Okay? So if he wants something from you, it's going to be reasonable. God is not this cruel God who does not know our abilities, does not care about what we can and cannot do. So, back to the verses here. 6. God says, "Why are you so angry?" the Lord asked Cain. "Why do you look so dejected? You will be accepted if you do what is right. But if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you. But you must subdue it and be its master." So he is giving Cain a great challenge, like a father does with his son. He says, look at this over here that you can do. There's a challenge you can do. You can do hoops over here. Man, you can dominate. Don't get angry if you fail, right? Let's try to dominate. So that's what he's telling Cain. But he's not telling him to dominate Abel, is he? He's telling him to dominate something else, isn't he? So he's telling him that a spirit is trying to claim him. Sin. Sin is crouching at the door, right? He describes sin not as just this innocuous thing, like, right? He's not describing sin as just this thing that you do, right? No, sin is this animal, like a lion who's creeping around trying to have you, right? So that's how God is describing it. Like you go out into the field in the woods and there's this animal behind a tree who wants to snatch you. So he's telling him to be careful of this dangerous thing that might take him. And it says about God that he chastens whom he loves. And this is exactly what God was doing here with Cain. He was chastening him. So he loved Cain, right? And he was teaching him how to defeat the devil, how to defeat this evil spirit who is trying to have him and destroy him. Because that's exactly what Satan does, or that's what sin does. Sin is a spirit that comes into your life and destroys you and wants to have you and destroy you, right? And if he instead of just destroying you, if he can use your sin to destroy others, then that's far more satisfying for this evil spirit. So, which is exactly what happens, isn't it? So, God is asking Cain to be based and to be strong and to work out, right? Right? Like, come on, bro. Check your spine. Do the right thing. Don't let it have you. Don't let it dominate you. You have to dominate it. right? So you have to seize it instead of it seizing you. Take control, right? And so this is why for boys, self-control is such an important concept. Because they actually feel the challenge. They're kind of like, I want to square up, get like a little stronger here, right? My dad is challenging me to do better, and I'm going to take the challenge, right? Instead of just getting angry at him or whatever because he didn't like what I did, I can learn from this, right? This can be a teachable situation here. And this is true for all of us who have been wronged in some way. Even if somebody legitimately wronged us, which nobody really wronged Cain here. Like, he literally murders his brother, and his brother didn't do anything against him, right? But Cain was just taking this situation all wrong. So, and this is, I think, why God actually gave him a lot of instruction here. I mean, think about it. God is talking to you. That's, by itself, that's pretty awesome. But second of all, he tells him what to do. He tells him how to defeat the enemy. But, of course, he fails, right? He goes out into the field. The field is where he works, because he works to create the vegetables and the fruits that he was trying to offer to God. And what does he use it for? He uses it as a place to hide his sin. So instead of being used as a place to produce life, it's being used as a place to destroy life. And so God even describes this in Genesis when he talks about the blood of Abel, right? So you'll see it here. One day Cain suggested to his brother, let's go out into the fields. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel, killed him. And then, of course, the Lord goes to Cain, because he knows exactly what's going on. And he says, where is your brother? Where is Abel? And he's like, am I my brother's guardian? I don't know where he is. Am I his keeper? Actually, we are our brother's keeper, by the way. That's the second commandment, to love your neighbor. But the Lord said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries to me from the ground. Now you are cursed and banished from the ground, which has swallowed your brother's blood. No longer will the ground yield good crops for you, no matter how hard you work. From now on you will be a homeless wanderer on the earth. Right? Is this because he did that and the blood seeped into the ground? So he did do it to himself? Or is this because God gave him a symbolic punishment, right? That he would remember. And it was a powerful punishment because it was what he loved. So God took, it's like you have a toy and you use that toy to hurt your brother, and God says, I'm taking that toy away. Right? This is your little toy. So, he was like a child, and God took his thing that he used for evil instead of for good. He took it away from him. So how can God take the ground from you, right? Well, he worked the ground as a farmer. So he literally cursed the ground for Cain and said, it's not going to work for you, buddy. Sorry. And of course, Cain says, my punishment is too great for me to bear. You've banished me from the land and from your presence. You've made me a homeless wanderer. Anyone who finds me will kill me. He just killed his brother, right? For no good reason. I mean, he's being a little dramatic in the sense that his punishment is too hard to bear. Yeah, of course it's too hard to bear, buddy. Like, you did like the worst thing you could do to your friend, to your brother. And because he was actually a good guy. Like, what kind of a reason is that? So, when the Lord punishes, it's just. And Cain ended up creating civilizations around the world that were built on things other than just what he was doing before. It became more of a stratified economy where there was more than just farming, right? Cain couldn't farm. So it was a sacrifice system, but it wasn't like what he was doing before. And he founded cities all over the place after this. So yes, it was a terrible punishment, but did God capital punish him and kill him in return? No, he didn't. So in many ways, God blessed Cain in other ways besides farming, didn't he? So if we learned to do something else, instead of taking the thing that we love and making it an idol, which is what Cain did. Cain made farming an idol, and he put that above God. Did you notice all that, everybody? That's exactly what Cain did. Cain said, my relationship with the ground is more important than my relationship with you. And because you didn't accept my great pumpkins or whatever that I worked so hard on, I'm going to punish you and punish my brother. So he put that thing he loved, which was farming, which, by the way, is exactly what God took from him, destroyed his idol. Right? He used that idol and set it above God. So friends, what we have to do instead, here's what we have to do. We have to learn from God to do what he says when he says, you have to master this spirit who wants to take you. That's number one. Don't let it take you and seize you. Number two, you have to learn to like the things in life differently than you do now. You have to use it, right? Not treat it as an idol to you. You have to be willing to let it go. And instead value your relationship with God more than that thing. So our political victories we're seeing now that James Lindsay is talking about, we have to learn to let that go. We have to give that catharsis up. The catharsis that Cain had was he wanted God to be pleased with his idol. God was not pleased. And so he killed his brother, right? And God banished him. And by banishing him, he was teaching him to do something else. Put down your idols and do something else. And that something else he could have been doing by learning from Abel, learning from God. How can I make a better sacrifice? That's all he had to do, guys. Just say, well, how can I improve this sacrifice? And guess what God probably would have told him after a while? You have set farming above me. Okay, your love of farming is evident. I'm glad you like it so much. But it's not what I prefer. I'm not a farming guy. So, and that's something that we don't understand, right? Like there's lots of things we don't understand about God. That's okay. We don't have to. We just have to work on the relationship to please him, right? Because our relationship with him has to be more important than our relationship with whatever it is, farming or making money or politics, or even our concept of law and order. Or like for me, I have to give up my stories. I have to give up my love of art and culture and music and film. I have to give up all those things, guys. I can't hold on to them and say, here's my sacrifice, God. And if someone says they don't like it, or if God says he doesn't like it, then I get angry. That's not how this should work. Okay? So you have a relationship with people and you work on that relationship. And when you're dealing like with the situation with James that he's talking about, guys, let's be rational about these criminals. There are criminals. They just need to be processed and put through the court system. A lot of this stuff can be solved that way if we just follow the laws that we have now, right? And then guess what we'll have? We'll be able to have a robust conversation in culture about what do we prefer, right? Like these people who defaced the Liberty Bell, why don't they just have a rational conversation about it instead of defacing it? How does that make your point? You've proven just that you're a lawbreaker. That's all you've proven. I have no idea what those people wrote on the bell. I can't even read it, except there was an F word. Really? Is this your rational argument? Right? So you're acting like Cain. You're being really emotional. You're saying, this is the worst thing ever. How could this ever have happened to me? You're like pouting, right? Okay? Instead, let's have a rational conversation about why this sacrifice is not cutting it. Right? So we can please God if we subdue that thing that wants to have us. We subdue it. We take control. We take seize the challenge, guys. Take control, even if it means you have to do jogging every day or something, right? This is the discipline maybe you need. But you take control. You start being rational. You stop being emotional about all these things, right? Realize the world hasn't ended. And what's most important about that is, hey, things could go south in our country, sure. But did your relationship with God go south? Like, you maybe made a terrible sacrifice. Maybe Cain worked really hard on what he did. This was a difficult sacrifice, sure. But does that mean we should throw it all away and throw our relationship with God away? No, of course not. So let's not lose our relationship. Like, you might not even be a Christian, but it's like, I have a relationship with civilization. I have a relationship with law and order. I have a relationship with my family and my friends and my community. Am I going to throw all that away so I can get some catharsis? Right? Which is what Cain got, didn't he? He got some catharsis, didn't he? So,
I really like what you're saying, because that's ultimately what Cain got. He got his moment of catharsis where he killed his brother, and he had an offering for God. He had this this fruit of his labor that he brought to God.
Yeah.
And it just wasn't right. And we don't really know why, but like, you could say that his heart wasn't in it, or his heart wasn't in the right place, whatever. But it wasn't what God wanted.
Right.
From Cain. And so Cain took this badly, and then God actually helps him. God actually gives him advice and instruction on what to do next.
Yeah.
And so that's really powerful. Like, but instead of choosing that, instead of Cain choosing God's way or God's righteousness, he ultimately chooses his own righteousness, his own vengeance, and takes matters into his own hands. He takes justice into his own hands, and has his cathartic experience, which turns out to be pretty bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what do you think about this in terms of like the civilizational impact? You know, like in our current age.
Yeah. It does feel like there are a lot of people who want something that, or maybe they're doing something that they believe pleases God or
Right.
pleases their sense of right and wrong, like pleases their sense of morality.
Yeah.
And so they're fighting really hard for this thing. So it could be on either side. I'm not. It could be any party really that's fighting for values, traditions, or identity, or whatever it is that people are on fire about right now.
Yeah.
They're willing to they're willing to fight to the death over these things. It seems they'd rather have this catharsis, and that beautiful verse that James Lindsay quoted talks about humility and talks about living at peace with one another and talks about honoring your brother above yourself. And that's what I feel like the message God was giving to Cain was one of peace and one of reasonableness, and we can talk about this, we can overcome this fire in your heart, or this emotion that's like struggling to get out. But he didn't take that opportunity. He took matters into his own hands.
Yeah.
To fight for his own sense of justice, and he felt that it was unjust that God liked Abel's sacrifice more than his, and so he wanted to enact justice.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, he felt it was unfair, I guess. He definitely lashed out, for sure. So I think catharsis is a really good word for it. But civilization, I think, is really about us all being able to make a great society together that's prosperous and that admits, because Rome was an expansive empire, correct? So it's like you're going to expand, right, and take over a people group or a tribe or some kind of kingdom maybe. And then the way Rome would do things is they would have a whole incentive group for a new people. So we've talked about in the past going under the yoke, which the Greeks, as far as I know, the Greeks and Persians did this kind of thing where you would go under the yoke. And this was a form of giving your loyalty to your new leader, which meant you would work for your new leader and make their empire now prosperous instead of your own. And if you did not go under the yoke, which is to be like an animal, right, and wear the yoke and plow the field, then if you did not do that, then you were killed. So similarly to Rome, right, you would buy into a new incentive system, and so this incentive system was different than where you came from. And so if our society changes and there's a new incentive system, well, we have to get used to that new incentive system. But if you're a Christian or you're Jewish and that incentive system involves worshiping a God that's not your God, you can't do that, friends. We're not allowed to do that. So that's something that we have to stand against. But if this is just a different kind of society that we have to buy into, an incentive system, well, we just have to get used to that. But it's not over yet, right? But what we do have is we have to start believing that we can rebuild our culture. And because what I think we need to do is move away from our culture the way we have it now. So there's a form of reform, right? But there's also a form of exodus. So Media Moses, which we founded last year, is about that exodus. Exodus away from Hollywood, away from our current culture of corruption and propaganda, and into a new culture which we can form. And the story of Exodus, by the way, provides a blueprint to understand how a new culture can be created. So it's just we ignore so many of these things. But they also keep in mind, you have to analogize some of this because they were doing something a little different. They weren't just creating a culture. They were also creating a nation. And we're not necessarily doing that. What we're doing is we're analogizing it, meaning that there's metaphorical values. We're pulling out of it, right? And we're seeing that our value system has to be reoriented. And so the Israelites had to reorient their value system away from the things that they valued when they were living in Egypt. And this took a lot of hardship for them. They were used to a certain kind of living. And they were also not used to having to trust in their God for day-to-day sustenance. They were not used to that. They were used to having all the water and the food they needed back in Egypt. So this was difficult for them. And there was a series of struggles they had to go through to rebuild their society, their more Jewish-centric society, and which is really based around their trust in God. So, before this, they were basically just sheep herders and stuff, cattle herders, goat herders in the land of Canaan or whatever. And then they all moved. There was a famine, and they all ended up moving to Egypt. And I think it was like hundreds of years later. I don't know if it was 400 years or something, 200, 400 years.
I think it was like 400 years.
That's a long time. Yeah. So, you've forgotten where you've come from in many ways. Like, you don't even know where you came from, because this is like, 8 generations. It's a long time. And so what God said is that he wanted his people to be set free because they were essentially slaves now. He wanted his people to be set free so they could worship him in the wilderness and form a new nation, right? So, but what does he really say? He says to worship me in the wilderness. So that's identifying immediately what the purpose of that relationship is. It isn't just to make a new nation, right? But in worshiping God in the wilderness, you are making a new nation because God has plans for you. He wants you to accomplish things, right? So it's not just, when people imagine heaven, for example, they have these kind of cartoonish images in their head of like sitting on clouds with harps, and, we're just going to be worshiping God all day long. Yes, I'm sure that will be nice because if you've worshipped God, as a believer, it's pretty awesome. It's like you're on drugs, but like, I'll just lay it out for you. But like, sure, I could see doing that for like a year, but like, God also wants you to do things. Like he has plans for you. He wants you, like for Cain, right? He wanted Cain to learn a new way of sacrifice, a better way of sacrificing, and to take control over these things that wanted to have him and to dominate. He wanted things for Cain, right? And he wanted things for Abel, and he wants things for all of his people. So he had plans for Israel out in the wilderness. Worshiping God is the foundation of the relationship, but then they do things. They fight the Amalekites like almost immediately, right? And they get water from a rock. And they start reorienting themselves with their relationship with God. And being like, oh, like we have to like get things straight here about who's in charge. Like God's in charge. Right? And then they also have to view their relationship with Moses differently than with God. They can't start deifying Moses. Right? So Moses immediately becomes a human being because he's trying to solve all their problems right away. And you just can't do that for other people. You know, so you remember when we saw that episode of The Promised Land, honey?
Yes, yeah.
Wasn't that
That's what I
fun?
was thinking of.
It's a fun little show. If nobody
Yeah.
has seen The Promised Land, it's on YouTube. It's like The Office, except Moses in the desert with his people.
It's pretty clever.
It's really fun. Yeah, and so it showed one of those lessons, actually, that the biblical things is that he was, you know, his father-in-law Jethro came to visit him, and noticed that Moses was like trying to solve all the problems of his people, and it's like, I admire you, but I wouldn't do things that way, you know. And at first you're like threatened, you're tempted to be like offended, like, oh, this guy's like going over my head. I mean, I know he's my father-in-law, but it's like, I mean, these are my people. I'm in charge of them, clearly. You know, but it's like, wait a second. Maybe he's right. Like, maybe this is actually good advice. And I need to start delegating authority because, why? Because I'm just a human being, right? I'm not God. So even though Moses was, in many ways, this fearsome prophet, right? And there were people who went against him. And, like, you can't just go against Moses, guys. Moses has got this staff that turns into a snake and all this stuff. So it's like, but keep in mind, this power isn't even coming from Moses. It's coming from God. So if Moses disobeys God, disobeys the power, well, what does that mean? Well, he gets punished as well. So God is letting us understand something here, that the only reason Moses is in this position is because he deeply honors and respects his relationship with God, the way Abel did, right? And so when we respect that relationship, we can also do great and mighty things. You have to put that relationship above so many other things. And if you can do that, then you can conquer this thing that wants to have you. So, and not murder your brother and not end up getting banished and all these bad things that happen. Right? Yeah. So what we want instead is to form a new nation, a new culture, a new people that wants to worship God and form a new nation. And like I'm telling you, there's a blueprint right here. And like I'm going to be getting into this blueprint more, but it's pretty cool stuff. So stay tuned with all of our future episodes. And I just wanted to parrot what James Lindsay is saying. Say, you've got the right idea, brother. We don't want to be like Cain, right? We don't want to be like these people who throws away the baby with the bathwater because we're angry. Sure, people have done wrong things and bad things, and they need to go through the process at the court system in our civilization. This is just how it works, guys. Love prevails in this situation, right? And people that are innocent get to go free. That's very important, right? That's Black Law's formulation, or what's it called? Yeah, it comes from the Bible, but basically it's about where our concept of justice comes from. And it's very, very important. So, any other thoughts you had before we wrap it up?
No, that was cool. And I like what you're saying about the blueprint. I like your tease to the blueprint.
Yeah.
That felt like a pretty good blueprint in Romans chapter 12.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was great advice from James Lindsay. He's challenging us to stay true to our actual beliefs, and not fall into some kind of nonsense thing, that idea of retribution. So, yeah, we got to bring back American values, and we got to bring back what made this country great. And that's not doing what Trump said, which is to ban flag burning. That's just not the way to do it. We want to respect human rights, and we want to put these people who deface the Liberty Bell in jail for a little bit. That's kind of what they deserve, and then to clean it up and pay a fine, right? Because that's fair. So they don't need to be banished like Cain. They didn't murder anybody. But you see what I'm saying? Like there's a way to deal with these things. God understands justice, and so we can learn from Him. And as long as we set our relationship with God above all these other things, He's got the answer for us, guys. We don't have to be afraid and think that there's no answer here. All right, so. Love you guys, and I'm glad I provided that little tease, because there's more coming in the future about how we're going to do this together. And I appreciate all you guys, and stand up for the culture. Oh, did I forget to ask where people can find you? Go ahead. Where can people find you, Rebecca? Sorry about that.
Oh, no, it was just so tidy. It was a nice little outro.
I know. Now I'll have to say it again.
Well, you can find me. I just started writing on Substack, so you can find me Rebecca Croft at Substack or .subscribe.
Scrub.
Yes, it's a tongue twister, but you can find me there. But you can also find me on Instagram at Jesus Loves Rebecca, and on YouTube at Rebecca Loves Jesus.
Yes.
And where can people find out more about you?
And I am the head writer at MediaMoses.com. I'm at Jon Croft on X and also on Instagram. And I'm at Cultural Warfare with Jon Croft on YouTube and also on X. And so thank you so much. And we love you guys. And stand up for the culture. All right. We'll see you next week, guys.